Racism, bigotry, and discrimination. These oppressive conditions that Southern Italians endured were only part of a wider anti Italian hatred ingrained in the dominant American culture. A turn of the century New York newspaper editorial expressed the general American opinion of arriving Italian immigrants. The sewer is choked. Europe is vomiting. In other words, the scum of immigration is viscerating upon our shores. The Southern Italians, in particular, who all came from different places in the South, were looked on with wonder and then with disgust as being strange, short in stature, dirty, ignorant, superstitious in their religion, noisy, gesticulating, had drooping long mustaches, and many of them wore earrings against the evil eye. This ignorant and malicious attitude had its basis in bigoted cultural myths, misconceptions, and a paranoia fomented by various political and social elements prior to the Southerners' arrival. It culminated in the virulent racist philosophy of the Know Nothing Party of the 1850s, which fostered hatred of Roman Catholicism, hatred of foreigners and foreign ways as un American, and resentment of cheap immigrant labor. Although the party had targeted early immigrant groups and was defunct by the time the Meridionali arrived, their racist ideology had already taken deep root in the American psyche. Ironically, analogous to sentiments expressed today about Mexican, South American, and Caribbean immigrants, these misconceived notions were fueled by the yellow journalism of the time and by influential political, social, and literary figures themselves inflamed with racial hatred. In 1891, the soon-to-be President Theodore Roosevelt called the lynching of 11 Sicilians in New Orleans a rather good thing, and boasted that he had said so at a party where there were what he called various Dago diplomats. President Woodrow Wilson accused immigrants, particularly Italians, of poisoning the very arteries of our national life. Such creatures of passion, disloyalty, and anarchy must be crushed out. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge expressed his loathing for Italian Americans, frequently and publicly. Madison Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, singled out Italians as inferiors. He claimed these immigrants were threatening to destroy the WASP American way of life by storming the Nordic ramparts of the United States and mongrelizing the good old American stock. A restrictive bill created by Boston's Immigration Restriction League and sponsored by Congressman Samuel McCall called for the exclusion of illiterates and those immigrants radically different from us in education, habits of life, and institutions of governments. In 1900, the total population of the Mezzogiorno was more than 70% illiterate. Southern Italians had a higher illiteracy rate than any other immigrant group. A literacy law restricting immigration was finally passed by the U.S. Congress in 1917. This flagrant anti-Southern Italian racism was also promulgated by the Meridionali's own countrymen, Northern Italians who for centuries had harbored a class bias against the South, had preceded them to America and brought with them this animosity towards Southern Italians. These Northerners, together with the new Italian government, had so convinced the United States immigration officials that there were two distinct Italian races, that separate records were kept for Southern and Northern Italian immigrants. Even Senator Lodge, that Italian hater, distinguished between Northern Italians, whom he termed Teutonic Italians, and Southern Italians. He labeled the latter inferior and said that the Great Republic should no longer be left unguarded from them. They arrived early enough to participate in the American Civil War on both sides. This is the Northern Italians. I forgot that part. Italian New Yorkers formed the Garibaldi Brigade, which distinguished itself in many battles for the Union cause. The Teutonic Italians, referring to their Austrian lineage. Native Americans were fed the ignorant and malicious explanations prevalent in northern Italy. That is, the Meridionale is culturally and or innately inferior. He is disposed to crime and violence. This insidious bigotry, passed from generation to generation, is evidenced in this anecdote involving my northern Italian American friend, Peter, who was invited to a girlfriend's home for dinner. At the table, when he learned that their heritage was Sicilian, he commented, "Oh, you're caffon." The table was silent. This term, an extreme insult denoting basely ignorant and low class, was often spoken at Pete's house when his family members were describing Southern Italians. Unfortunately, its meaning was never explained to him. He never saw the girl again. A Wisconsin University sociologist condemned all the Mediterranean races as being backward and morally inferior to those of Northern Europe. Italians were made up of two different races, and he distinguished the Italians of the South, with their marked inferiority, from those from the North. The sensational statements claiming that Southern Italians were morally corrupt and disposed to crime and violence were completely without merit or factual basis. In a painstaking study done in 1905 to 1906, The Italians in America, the authors concluded that a careful examination of the public records secured from every city in the country where nationalities are distributed in the records of arrest does not justify the assumption that the criminal tendencies of the Italians exceeded the average of the foreign or of the native population. In fact, Italian crime was lower than the average foreign-born population. The atrocious treatment of Southern Italians was justified by the racist assumption that they were biological inferiors of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. This generally accepted view was that they were an inferior race, as were blacks. On docks of New York, an Italian might be called a dago, or told that it takes two or three of him to make one white man. Portrayed as sullen, incorrigible, violent, knife-wielding criminals, and branded with vituperative and debasing epithets such as Black Guinea, Black Dago, Wop, and Greaser. WASPs could in good conscience treat these white immigrants as much as they already were treating the blacks and other inferior non-white races. This bigotry and scorn toward the Meridionale also stemmed from a paranoia and contempt for Roman Catholicism. Protestant nativists initially had directed their hostility at the millions of religiously fervent Irish Catholics with whom they also had a political feud that simmers even today, who had preceded the Italians by a generation. In pre-Civil War America, leading citizens, newspapers, and politicians openly expressed this hostility towards Catholicism. The inventor of the telegraph, Samuel Morse, condemned Catholics in his writings, a foreign conspiracy against the liberties of the United States. A popular minister accused the Pope of plotting to dominate the American West. An editor charged that the Irish were America's enemies because they are the truest guards of the papacy. This fear of Vatican influence was bolstered by American Archbishop John Hughes' statement that everyone should know that we have in our mission to convert the world. The mysterious and alien ways of the Southern Italian and their resistance to American assimilation encouraged this anti-Catholic hysteria.